Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to your Daily Penguin. This is our tour through my Penguin Classic wall, book by book, author by author, period by period. and we don't know what we're going to encounter, but lately we've been hitting at least one book at a time, sometimes epical books, sometimes things that are universally known. Today is a comparatively rare example of a time when we vault forward in our end goal of getting to the end of this wall before the end of the year. Realistically, before the beginning of December. That's not all that much time. But today, we have not one book, but 6 books, because we're going... I must have arranged these. These are all that I have from one author. And that's great, because that will get us further down the shelf. And the author is Sir Walter Scott. And I have Penguin Classics of Ivanhoe, The Heart of Midlothian. Here, let's do a steep pile. We have Ivanhoe, probably his most famous work today. The Heart of Midlothian, Guy Mannering. There is Guy Mannering. Kenilworth, his fantastic historical novel. Rob Roy, maybe that's the most famous one because of the movie. And finally, Waverley, the one that started it all. A nice pink black spine paperback of Waverley, and you can tell if you know your Walter Scott, but of course you don't. You can tell right away that I'm missing some big ones. I know for sure. I'm relatively certain, for instance, that Penguin does or did an edition of Old Mortality. And I feel sure that they did The Bride of Lammermoor as well. The one that isn't here, of course, is one we just saw Walter Scott just recently on this channel. That's Quentin Durward. I found that in an old Scribner's Illustrated classic, and I'm not 100% sure that Penguin doesn't do that too. I would imagine that at one point or another, Penguin published all of the Waverley novels. And these are, by and large, historical novels of one vintage or another. They're all fantastic to read. Sir Walter Scott is fantastic to read. He doesn't have native readers anymore. I don't believe that he is read outside of academia anymore, and I think that's a terrible shame. I'd also, of course, would point out, me being me, there hasn't been really a great biography of this author in forever. There certainly hasn't been in the last few years, in the last decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, and there ought to be one, because his life is fascinating. I don't believe that Penguin ever did a big thick volume of his journals. I think Oxford did. It makes for fascinating reading. I wish that Penguin would do that too. But then again, I have a wish for a lot of Sir Walter Scott that doesn't exist. I'd like a nice big fat book of his book reviews, of course. Because he was in addition to being everything else that he was a very active book reviewer to the end of his days. But a biography is a particular thing to miss, because he led a fascinating life. And was, despite the fact that he's not known at all for it today, he was a very wealthy and well-known, universally acclaimed poet when he broke into literature. That was the literature that he broke into. And people memorized his poems. They hung on every volume. The volumes sold extremely well. They made him a pile of money. He even got offered the poet laureateship and turned it down. It was only after he had conquered completely the world of poetry that he moved to the world of fiction, and especially historical romances of a particular Sir Walter Scott type, that it can legitimately be said he almost invented. Of course, the actual trailblazer was a woman who wrote the Scottish Chiefs right before him, but he was certainly the one that made it an industry in the UK, and that made it extremely profitable. It was extremely profitable. Although his books were not published under his name, they made him a mint of money. Just a mint of money, most of which he poured into a publishing concern, for which he was pretty much the only stockholder. It was pretty much his company. And in 1825, that company went belly up rather abruptly and lost Scott everything. He had barely 2 farthings to rub together when that was over with. And this was a popular guy, not just as a literary figure, but also in society. He had lots of friends, including lots of wealthy friends, would have been happy to ease him out of his financial difficulties. One of those friends was the king. But he refused, and instead said that with his own hand he would write himself out of penury and back into balanced books. And he spent the rest of his life doing that, writing at, if anything, a doubled pace from what was already an incredible amount of productivity. This is a guy who worked all day long in writing, but he significantly increased that pace and wrote like crazy in his last few years. And it didn't technically work, not in his own lifetime. He died in debt, and he died not knowing that anything would ever change that. It turned out that his incredible productivity and the canny marketing of publishers allowed his books to just keep selling and selling and selling, and that did eventually wipe out the debt. But that whole story is just fascinating. And I think the only reason why, if you are a popular academic historian or a popular biographer and you can't sell an 800-page biography of Sir Walter Scott, I think the reason is because his reading has largely fallen into desuetude. He has largely fallen into the shadow. Unfortunately, it's not that his period has fallen into shadow, of course, because his great contemporary, Jane Austen, is read by all and sundry for pleasure. Jane Austen is taught in schools. She's on syllabuses, but she's also read for pleasure, especially here on BookTube. And that doesn't happen with Sir Walter Scott, and it really should, because his books are enormously enjoyable. Once you get used to his patter, his particular diction, his particular pacing, which can sometimes be a little bit on the pokey side, his books are terrific. And I wish that I had them all in Penguin. I often bemoan on these Penguin videos that Penguin doesn't publish enough of a certain author. That is true with Sir Walter Scott, although I wouldn't expect them to publish his off-the-beaten-path stuff. If you can't make money on The Heart of Midlothian, you're not going to be able to make money on anything else, especially his collected book reviews. But even so, I could wish for, and will keep an eye peeled for, the Penguin Classic trade paperback Sir Walter Scott that I don't have. Like I said, I'm at least pretty sure that they do Old Mortality and The Bride of Lammermoor, and that I just don't have them. And they may do Quentin Durward as well. I'm pretty sure that Penguin does not do the journal of Sir Walter Scott. I had that once upon a time, read the daylights out of it, but it was an Oxford World's Classic mass market paperback that I had. God knows where that thing is. What fun it was to read, to be inside this author's world, because he is so good at writing about his world in his journal. I really should go online and see if there's a paperback copy of the journal that I could get, even if it's not a Penguin. But that is your Daily Penguin for today. It's not just one book. In fact, it's one author. I'm almost certain this is all of this author that I have. So we vault forward 6 books in our quest. And this is an author who is a recommend. I know that I'm bucking against the trend to do that, but Sir Walter Scott is a recommend. You will really enjoy him if you give him a chance. Keep in mind, he is writing for a completely different reading zeitgeist than exists today. And it's not his fault, nor is it a mark that can be laid against him, that he doesn't have the genius of Jane Austen, for instance, to pace herself to any zeitgeist. Jane Austen doesn't need any trouble competing with, she doesn't have any trouble competing with TV or radio or Twitter. And Sir Walter Scott does. When it comes to Scott, you have to keep in mind that he was writing for an audience that didn't do anything else, that had no other distractions. It's candlelight reading. It's slow, absorptive reading, and you have to do it that way, or you'll miss a lot of the payoffs. So your Walter Scott, your Penguin, is a recommend, but I don't know what I would do. I guess maybe a read-along of Ivanhoe might do the trick, but one way or another, I'm sure that you will get into the rhythm of him on your own if you give him half a chance. So that's your Penguin for today. Who knows, tomorrow we may be into the present day or into the ancient past again. We will almost certainly be to one book again instead of a whole author, but who knows? I'm intentionally not looking ahead, so we'll be surprised together. Me a little bit before you tomorrow. So I'll wrap this up, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.